1943, a windowless room at 84 Avenue Foch, Paris, SD headquarters. A British agent sits handcuffed to a chair. He has been searched 3 times. His pockets emptied, his shoes examined, his belt confiscated. The Germans are thorough. They have found everything. Everything except the 2 blades sewn into the lining of his jacket lapel. This is the tale of Britain's most diminutive weapon of World War II. A knife so minuscule it weighed barely 40 grams. So subtle it could evade even the most meticulous security police inspection. And according to combat manuals developed by Fairbairn, sufficiently lethal to render someone unconscious within mere seconds if it struck a primary blood vessel. The lapel knife wasn't designed to triumph in combat. Its purpose was to generate a sudden eruption of violence, an instant of disorder, a fleeting window of opportunity when all other alternatives had vanished. By the year 1941, Britain's Special Operations Executive confronted a challenge that no standard armament could address. Operatives from SOE, parachuted into territories under enemy occupation, carried firearms, carried demolition charges, carried wireless communication devices. The Welrod silenced pistol, plastic explosives camouflaged as lumps of coal, transmitters compact enough to conceal in luggage. Britain had furnished these operatives with everything required to conduct warfare from concealment. However, the instant an operative fell into enemy hands, every piece of that equipment vanished. German security forces possessed exceptional expertise in examining captives. The Sicherheitsdienst, the Sicherheitspolizei, the machinery that prisoners referred to simply as the Gestapo. They seized weaponry. They removed garments. They scrutinized footwear, waist straps, timepiece bands, every article that could harbor something valuable. They discovered everything. And subsequently the questioning sessions commenced. The Germans had perfected interrogation into an exact discipline. Avenue Foch in the French capital, nerve center of the SD throughout France. Prince Albrechtstrasse in Berlin, command hub of the complete security infrastructure. Provincial command posts spanning occupied territories. Detained operatives encountered weeks or months of relentless questioning, deprivation of rest, physical beatings, simulated drowning. The Germans sought identities of fellow resistance fighters. They pursued addresses of secure locations and armament storage sites. They demanded wireless codes and broadcasting timetables, intelligence that could dismantle complete SOE operations. Certain operatives surrendered information under duress. Others persisted until their final breath, but virtually none managed to flee because an weaponless captive shackled in a monitored chamber buried deep within hostile command centers possessed zero alternatives. The sentries carried arms. The entrances remained sealed. The structure teemed with adversaries. SOE required a method to provide their operatives one ultimate alternative, an implement that remained undetectable, an implement accessible even when physically restrained, an implement diminutive enough to remain hidden in obvious places, yet sufficiently deadly to manufacture a solitary opportunity for liberation. They consulted 2 individuals who had invested decades analyzing methods of close-quarters killing. William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes reached Station 12, a stone house in Hertfordshire, during the final months of 1940. Fairbairn had invested over 2 decades with the Shanghai Municipal Police, operating in some of the planet's most brutal streets. His physique bore knife, wounds from countless confrontations. He had investigated every combat system accessible from Japanese jujutsu to Chinese martial arts, and combined them into a methodology created exclusively for terminating life. Sykes had operated beside him, instructing the Shanghai Sharpshooter Division. In partnership, they had previously created the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, the 7-inch commando blade that would transform into the war's most recognized edged weapon. However, the fighting knife measured too large. 7 inches of tempered steel cannot remain concealed from an exhaustive examination. Sentries would locate it in pockets, in boots, fastened to limbs. Therefore, Fairbairn and Sykes reduced dimensions, substantially reduced them. Based on testimony from Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Wood, station commander at Station 12. These two individuals invented what became recognized as the thumb knife or lapel knife throughout their period at Aston House. Curiously, Fairbairn's formal military documentation catalogues every weapon he conceived, encompassing the fighting knife, the Koch spring baton, and the spiked necklace. It contains no reference to the lapel knife. Certain historians suggest Eric Sykes particularly warranted principal acknowledgement for these assassination-focused hidden weapons. One private collector purportedly possesses a lapel dagger displaying what seems to be Sykes's Chinese seal, his individual marking. Though such privately held collection assertions prove challenging to authenticate, regardless of exact attribution, the construction proved ruthlessly elementary. A cutting edge measuring between 1 1/2 and 2 1/2 inches in length. No grip in the conventional understanding, merely a slender metal handle approximately the breadth of a thumb. Certain models featured sharpened edges on both sides. Alternative versions possessed a single cutting edge with a sharpened secondary edge. All were refined for rapid, penetrating thrusts. Complete length beneath 4 inches, mass approximately 40 grams, lighter than a cellular telephone, more compact than a writing instrument. The brilliance resided in the protective covering. Constructed from thin metal or animal hide, it incorporated numerous small perforations around its periphery. These perforations permitted the covering to be stitched directly into garments, into the fold of a jacket, into a shirt's neckline, into the joining of trouser material, into the interior layer of an overcoat. The knife transformed into component of the clothing itself. Subsequent reports indicate that H.G. Long and Company of Sheffield produced the majority of manufacturing output, and that Arthur Akers, a shoemaker in Aston village, fashioned leather protective coverings. Certain variations incorporated a small attachment point for a restraining cord that encircled the operative's digit, guaranteeing the blade remained impossible to drop or dislodge. Multiple variations surfaced. The standard lapel knife measured roughly 3 inches in total. The sleeve blade extended beyond 6 inches with a squared cross-section spike engineered purely for penetration. The most clever variation proved to be the insole blade, a bent 5 1/2 inch cutting edge hidden within the leather foot cushion of an operative's footwear, extracted by pulling a hidden string. All possessed identical matte black surface treatment for clandestine operations. All were engineered to remain invisible throughout examinations. If you find this material captivating, please consider subscribing. It requires nothing, consumes a moment, and assists the channel in continuing these thorough explorations into British innovation. Now, returning to what operatives received instruction to accomplish with these minuscule blades. SOE training facilities instructed operatives to employ the lapel knife with frightening exactness. At installations such as Arisaig in Scotland and Beaulieu in Hampshire, teachers presented what Fairbairn designated the timetable of death. This comprised a diagram of human anatomy displaying the position of primary arteries, the depth underneath the epidermis to access them, and the calculated duration for a victim to lose awareness once severed. The carotid artery in the throat running merely 2 centimeters underneath the skin. Fairbairn's diagram asserted 5 seconds to unconsciousness, 12 seconds to expiration. The subclavian artery underneath the collarbone, even more rapid, 2 seconds to unconsciousness, 3 1/2 to expiration. The femoral artery in the upper leg, the brachial artery within the upper arm. Pupils committed these calculations to memory and rehearsed the extraction movement until it became reflex. Lightning velocity, teachers insisted. Your survival relies on being quicker than the sentry reaching for his firearm. The thumb dagger grasp required wrapping the restraining loop around the index digit, while gripping the weapon between thumb and index finger. This provided control and prevented the blade from being struck away throughout a confrontation. Pupils rehearsed on mannequins, on sandbag targets, on sides of cattle meat. The action had to transform into automatic. Contemporary medical evaluation has demonstrated these calculations were generous at minimum. Rex Applegate, Fairbairn's American student, subsequently acknowledged at a Blade Enthusiasts exhibition in 1987 that the timetable of death lacked medical precision. Its genuine function proved psychological. Young operatives confronting deployment into hostile territory required confidence. They required belief that even when everything else was stripped from them, they maintained a fighting chance. The planned scenario proved grimly precise. An operative restrained throughout questioning, wrists shackled but some degree of motion, a sentry positioned nearby. The operative reaches gradually toward their neckline as if correcting their attire. The sentry anticipates nothing. The blade comes free. One attack to the throat or the hand extending for a weapon. Not a guaranteed liberation, a temporary disturbance. Moments of confusion to seize a weapon, to shatter restraints, to access an exit. In a structure filled with opponents, that could be everything an operative could anticipate. Here is where historical documentation becomes maddeningly fragmentary. Despite comprehensive investigation through declassified SOE documentation, operative autobiographies, and post-war questioning of German authorities, no authenticated report exists of a detained operative employing a lapel knife against their questioners. The vivid picture of a British intelligence officer cutting a sentry's throat throughout questioning seems to be folklore rather than verified reality. What the archives do reveal is that detained operatives resisted using whatever they could discover. Frank Pickersgill, a Canadian SOE operative detained in June 1943, made an escape attempt from SD Command Center at 84 Avenue Foch sometime in 1944. According to post-war inquiry by Vera Atkins, utilizing declassified documentation and statements from German prisoners, including SD Commander Joseph Kiefer, Pickersgill assaulted his sentries with a shattered wine container, eliminated one or two of them, subsequently leaped from a second-floor opening, fracturing his arm before receiving multiple gunshot wounds. He utilized an improvised implement, not an officially issued hidden blade. Michael Trotobas, eliminated in November 1943 when German security personnel raided his position, purportedly eliminated and injured two attackers. The implement he utilized remains unidentified. This lack of verification doesn't establish the lapel knife, saw no operational deployment. SOE functioned under exceptional secrecy. Numerous documents were intentionally eliminated following the conflict. MRD Foote, the authorized SOE chronicler, operated under limitations so extreme he was prohibited from informing his spouse what he was researching. Documentation that could verify operational employment may have simply been erased. What we can declare with absolute certainty is that the implement existed, was distributed, and provided operatives something no alternative military organization supplied. A concealed alternative, a final card to deploy. That lack of authenticated employment doesn't render the lapel knife worthless. It reveals what the weapon genuinely represented. Protection you pray you never require activating. No equally well-documented German initiative for sewn-in miniature daggers has been located. The Abwehr, the SD, the security infrastructure. None seem to have engineered miniaturized hidden blades for their own personnel in the identical methodical fashion. Their methodology to covert operations emphasized counterfeit uniforms, recruited indigenous populations, and transmission deception rather than the category of stay-behind destruction that SOE concentrated on. When the American OSS was established in June 1942, they embraced British lapel knife construction completely. The minuscule Sheffield blade became regulation equipment for American operatives equally. The lapel knife symbolizes something more significant than its physical measurements imply. It represents the philosophy that propelled SOE from its establishment in July 1940. Winston Churchill had commanded the fresh organization to ignite Europe. Extraordinary challenges demand extraordinary responses. When your operatives confront detention, brutalization, and execution in hostile territory, you provide them every conceivable edge, even one that measures 40 grams and conceals in a coat neckline. At Station 15, The thatched barn installation responsible for final conditioning of operatives before deployment. Tailors meticulously stitched the minuscule weapons into continental-style garments. Every element carried significance. The stitching had to be appropriate. The material had to be appropriate. German inspectors understood British production methods. A solitary English stitch configuration could expose an operative, but the knife appropriately hidden became imperceptible. Component of the garment, component of the operative. Presently, authentic SOE lapel knives prove exceptionally scarce. The Imperial War Museum maintains specimens in their assemblage, catalogued alongside explosive rodents and camouflaged coal. Auction establishments periodically present pieces with differing degrees of authenticated origin, though enthusiasts caution that replicas dramatically exceed genuine wartime specimens. Surviving manufacturing documentation remains fragmentary, unlike the approximately 2 million Fairbairn Sykes fighting knives whose production was thoroughly documented. The weapon that was engineered to be imperceptible has predominantly vanished. But the concept underlying it, that British innovators could resolve the unresolvable, that even a detained operative was never genuinely powerless, that endures. In the shadowed chambers of occupied territories, in the possession of men and women who understood they might never return home, a 2-inch blade stitched into a jacket fold represented something the Germans could never confiscate. One ultimate alternative, one concealed opportunity. The potential, however minimal, of reversing the situation on an interrogator and departing alive. That was British innovation. That was SOE.